Sarana Veller stood on the observation deck of the embassy tower, gazing out across the storm-lashed landscape of Zurith. The planet's endless, jagged peaks were bathed in the toxic fog that roamed the surface like an ancient predator, suffocating everything in its path. The storm's rhythm mirrored the unease churning inside her. Something had shifted today, something that could change everything. The human arrived. She hadn't expected it to happen so soon. The diplomatic liaison, Captain Julian Cross. His name had been uttered with a mixture of scorn and grudging respect by the higher echelons of her people. The Terran solution to everything, brute force, they had said. A soldier, they'd called him. As if that could encapsulate the depths of a person. From her perch high above the colony, Sarana's violet eyes scanned the shuttle, its metallic hull shimmering against the toxic sky. The human stepped out. He was tall, his posture rigid, his movements deliberate and controlled. The wind did little to ruffle his dark uniform, though the air shimmered with the oppressive weight of Zuritha's atmosphere. The delegation, already there to greet him, was busy with ceremonial pleasantries, their formalities so meticulously planned they almost seemed scripted. Sarana hated the small talk. But what she hated more was the deep, uninvited prickling in the pit of her stomach as the human entered the scene. He wasn't just a soldier, he wasn't just a man. The fear she'd buried for so long resurfaced in one sharp, insistent wave. Her people had long resisted the idea of union with humanity, and the thought of it, an idea so alien, so dangerous, seemed more real than ever. What could they offer besides chaos? She took a breath, trying to shake the tightness in her chest. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. Ambassador Veller, a voice interrupted her thoughts. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Tralcor, stood behind her. His smooth, insect-like skin gleamed in the dim light, his many arms folded with a tight, practiced patience. It's time. The Terran's presence has been acknowledged. Shall we proceed? Her fingers tightened around the railing. Yes. We proceed. The ceremonial halls of the embassy were vast and sterile, echoing with the soft hum of air filtration systems. Sarana took her seat at the long, oval table, the Valari crest shining faintly in the center. She could feel his presence before she saw him. Captain Cross was an anomaly, exuding a strange warmth in an otherwise cold room. There was a palpable aura of otherness about him, one that defied her logical observations. The moment he stepped into the room, it was impossible to ignore. The human walked with a purposeful stride, his boots clicking against the floor in rhythmic, authoritative fashion. His eyes briefly met hers, and for a moment, she felt a flicker, something unfamiliar, stirring deep in her chest. Was it a recognition? Was it fear? Ambassador Veller, Captain Cross greeted her, his voice steady but warm. It was a tone that did not belong to a soldier. Captain Cross, she replied, her words careful, guarded. She allowed herself only a brief glance at him before turning her attention back to the official agenda. She couldn't afford to engage with him emotionally, not when everything was on the line. We've been given the honor of assisting with the defense of your colony, Cross continued, his eyes never leaving hers. The intensity in his gaze made her pulse quicken, but she forced herself to remain steady. I understand your concerns, Ambassador. But the Terran Federation isn't here to impose. We're here to support. Sarana's lips pressed into a thin line. She'd heard this before, from diplomats and soldiers alike. Humans, always claiming to be supporting others when, in truth, they sought dominance. It was in their nature. Support, she muttered under her breath. A word often used to mask a deeper agenda. Cross's lips twitched, and she couldn't tell if it was amusement or something else. He ignored her coldness, choosing instead to take his seat. There was a quiet confidence in the way he carried himself, a confidence that unsettled her more than it should have. He wasn't intimidated, not by her, not by the high-stakes tension that always permeated the Valari diplomatic rooms. Her eyes narrowed. You may be here for defense, Captain, but your presence risks far more than you realize. Zurith is an ancient land, sacred to my people. We do not welcome foreign influence lightly. His brow furrowed. I'm not here to change your culture, Ambassador. I'm here to ensure that the colony survives the unrest. But I'm also here to listen. To understand. Understand, she repeated sharply. You would never understand. The human propensity for, she faltered, aware that her voice had risen. She hated how quickly the anger flared, how it made her seem emotional. Weak. You invade, you conquer, you breed chaos. This is the nature of your people. A heavy silence fell across the room, the words hanging like an insult. It was a low blow, one meant to wound. She could feel the weight of every set of eyes in the room, Valari and Terran alike. Cross's gaze softened, and for a moment, something flickered in his expression. You think we breed chaos, but chaos is what the galaxy throws at us. We adapt, Ambassador. We endure. His tone was calm, but there was an intensity to it that sent a ripple through the air. What would you have me do? Ignore it all? Walk away? Pretend the problems don't exist? She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. And what of us, Captain Cross? What of our survival? We've done fine without you here. You think you have, he replied quietly. But the truth is, you haven't. Not with the insurgents on the rise. Not with resources running thin. Sarana clenched her fists, biting back the sting of his words. There was truth in them, though she refused to admit it. She had spent years protecting Zurith, preserving its customs and integrity, but now everything felt fragile, too fragile. Her gaze locked with his, and for the first time, something more than hatred crossed the distance between them. A flicker of understanding. Recognition. His eyes weren't just cold military resolve, they held something more. But before she could respond, a voice from the side broke the tension. Ambassador, Captain, we have to proceed with the discussions. The Federation requires your immediate input on the upcoming territorial divisions. Sarana tore her eyes away, forcing herself back to the task at hand. She couldn't afford to linger on the human soldier any longer. Not when the future of her people was at stake. She stood and nodded curtly. Let us proceed, then. As they moved into the next phase of the meeting, Sarana couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle wasn't over resources or territories. It was something far more dangerous, something that had little to do with war and everything to do with the ways they were both unknowingly changing each other. The days passed in a blur of sterile diplomacy, but Sarana couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. Captain Julian Cross was everywhere. Not physically, no, he didn't hover, didn't intrude, but his presence was felt like a constant hum beneath her skin. In meetings, he was the calm in a storm of bureaucracy, his voice steady and convincing when the Valari were beginning to lose their patience. In the corridors, his footsteps echoed too loudly, too insistently, reminding her that there was always a soldier just behind her, his gaze never far from hers. Sarana told herself she could ignore it. That she could maintain control over her thoughts, her emotions. But every time they spoke, there was something else in his tone. It wasn't just a military officer speaking, it was a man trying to understand. Today was no different. The meeting had been a formal one, discussing security measures for the colony as unrest grew among the outer settlements. The Valari elders were split between diplomacy and defense, but Sarana had little patience for politics today. The walls of the embassy felt like they were closing in around her, the heavy weight of centuries of tradition pressing against her chest. She walked briskly toward the observation deck, needing air. Needing space. The door hissed open and, as expected, Captain Cross was already there. Leaning against the railing, staring out at the toxic haze that hung low over the jagged peaks. The sight was familiar, yet he looked almost at peace. Sarana stopped a few steps short, her heart beating faster for reasons she couldn't explain. He was never far from her thoughts anymore. Ambassador, Cross's voice was calm, a touch of curiosity beneath it. I thought you might be here. She didn't respond immediately, her fingers curling into the edge of her sleeve. Her mind raced. She didn't want this. She didn't want to feel this pull. But there it was, undeniable. She'd never been drawn to anyone this way, this confusingly. Human. Your colony's at the edge of a knife, she said, forcing her tone to stay cool, professional. The question is, which way will it fall, into chaos or into order? He pushed off from the railing and turned to face her. The intense focus in his eyes unsettled her more than it should have. It's more complicated than that, Ambassador. You know that. If your people don't want our help, they'll have to face the consequences themselves. But I'm not here to force you into anything. The words, simple as they were, held a weight that made Sarana uneasy. He would never understand, she thought. Humans didn't know how to leave well enough alone. They couldn't accept no for an answer. They were like predators, always circling, always watching, waiting for the moment of weakness to strike. I don't need you here, she said, the words sharper than intended. Zurith has stood long before your people arrived. We can manage without you. I'm not trying to impose, Cross replied, his tone unchanged. But I think you know deep down that your people can't face this alone. And neither can mine. We're stronger together. Sarana shook her head, her chest tightening. She wasn't sure why his calm, steady response made her more angry than anything else. You're wrong. Your strength doesn't belong here. You're not welcome. The words were harsh, but she needed to believe them. She had to. Otherwise, everything she'd worked for, the integrity of her people, the sanctity of Zuritha's traditions, was at risk. Everything could fall apart. She couldn't let that happen. Cross studied her with that unsettling intensity, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if searching for something buried beneath the surface. What are you so afraid of, Sarana? His use of her name felt personal. She hadn't given him permission to cross that line. But he had. And it shook her more than she wanted to admit. I'm afraid, she began slowly, her voice tinged with bitterness, that if we let you in, you'll never leave. That one day you'll take everything from us, just like you've done on every other world you've touched. He didn't flinch. I've never been on a world that needed to be taken. The silence between them stretched, thick and oppressive. Sarana felt an unfamiliar pull in her chest, like the air between them was charged with some invisible force. She turned away, needing to break the moment before it consumed her. I should return, she said stiffly, but her voice cracked slightly, betraying the fragile composure she'd been clinging to. She was tired, exhausted by the war between her duty and her growing disquiet. By the invisible thread pulling her toward him. But he didn't let her go. Not yet. Sarana, Cross said quietly. You don't need to keep this distance between us. You don't have to pretend like you're fine with all this. It's okay to be afraid. To be uncertain. She turned back toward him, her eyes flashing. I'm not afraid of you. No? He stepped a fraction closer, his posture still open, but there was something in his stance, something that made her heart race. Then why do I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff whenever we talk? Because, from where I'm standing, it looks like you're more afraid of what you might feel than anything else. The words landed harder than she expected, knocking the breath from her chest. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The truth was too close, too raw. She couldn't acknowledge it. Not yet. Not in this place, not in front of him. Instead, she took a sharp step back, her voice low and cold. You don't understand. His gaze softened, the hardness in his features giving way to something gentler. I'm trying to, Sarana. I am. She met his eyes, and for the briefest of moments, something shifted. He wasn't just the soldier, the foreign force. He was human. A person. And that was the problem, wasn't it? She had never allowed herself to see it. To let him be anything more than the enemy. Perhaps you should leave, Sarana said, the words sharp again, the walls closing back in. This conversation is over. Cross nodded slowly, but he didn't argue. His gaze lingered for one final moment, and then he stepped away. Maybe we'll talk again soon, he said, his voice low, almost wistful. When you're ready. Sarana didn't respond, watching as he walked back toward the door, leaving her standing alone once more. The silence in his absence was deafening. But in her heart, the space between them felt much smaller now. She couldn't tell if it was the distance she feared, or the human himself. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the dimly lit hallways of the embassy. Sarana Veller's pulse quickened as she glanced toward the door, her mind already bracing for the encounter she knew was inevitable. Captain Julian Cross. She had managed to avoid him for days, focusing on her duties, burying herself in the endless flow of meetings and reports, but she couldn't hide forever. Not from him. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and there he stood. His uniform was slightly more disheveled than usual, the crease in his shirt collar a subtle sign that he wasn't as composed as he liked to appear. He looked tired, but his eyes still held that unwavering focus, the sharpness of a man who had seen too much and learned even more. "Sarana," he said quietly, his voice carrying that familiar weight. "I need to speak with you." Her breath caught in her throat at the sound of her name, but she forced herself to remain neutral. "Captain," she replied, her tone cold but not unkind. "You're a bit early for our scheduled meeting." He stepped further into the room, his boots making a soft clicking noise on the polished floor. "I couldn't wait." His eyes scanned her face for a moment, and then he sighed, taking a seat without waiting for an invitation. The familiar distance between them seemed to shrink just by his presence, and despite her best efforts, Sarana felt the edges of her composure slip. "I'm listening," she said, her voice stiff. She took her place behind the desk, her back straight, hands clasped in front of her. This was her domain, the one place she could retain control. But something about the way Cross leaned forward, his fingers tapping lightly on the edge of the table, made it hard to feel in control. His gaze was intense, searching, but there was something else behind it now, something unspoken, something she wasn't sure she wanted to acknowledge. "I've been talking to my people," he began, his tone softer than usual. "I think we need to talk more openly. About what's really going on." Sarana tilted her head, a subtle challenge in her eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" Cross hesitated, then leaned back in his chair, rubbing the back of his neck as though the weight of the conversation had settled into his bones. "I know we're not getting along. You don't trust me, and I can't pretend that I don't feel it. But I know, there's more at stake here than either of us is willing to admit." She felt a flicker of something, frustration, confusion, maybe even fear, as she met his gaze. "What are you getting at, Captain?" He stared at her, his expression earnest. "I'm not here for conquest, Sarana. I never was. But I'm not blind. The unrest is growing faster than anyone anticipated. Your people are losing control. And if we don't act quickly, if we don't find a way to work together, the colony will fall apart. And when that happens, the Federation won't be able to help you." He paused, the silence between them stretching, heavy with implications. "Neither will I." Sarana's heart skipped a beat. The words weren't a threat, they were a statement of fact. The truth, as harsh as it was, hung in the air like a fog that neither of them could clear. She wanted to dismiss him, wanted to push him out of the room, but something about the way he said it, something about the raw sincerity in his voice, stopped her. "I don't need your pity, Captain," she replied, her tone snapping, though the edge of defensiveness was weak, even to her own ears. "And I certainly don't need your help." Cross didn't flinch. He didn't even look away. "I'm not offering pity. I'm offering a choice. A way out. You're right to be afraid, Sarana. We all are. But you're not alone in this." Her gaze hardened. "You don't get it. You can't get it." His voice remained steady. "Maybe not. But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to listen." She pressed her lips together, her jaw clenched. Her fingers dug into the surface of the desk, nails biting into the smooth wood. Damn him, she thought. Why did it feel so much like he understood her? Why did it feel as though he was getting closer, inch by inch, until there would be no space left between them? "Why?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "Why do you care? We're nothing alike." Cross's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, Sarana saw something there that unsettled her more than the anger or the irritation. It was understanding, genuine understanding. "You're wrong," he said gently, his voice now almost a whisper. "We're more alike than you think. We've both fought to survive. We both understand what it's like to lose everything." Sarana's breath caught. The vulnerability in his words was unexpected, but it was the sincerity that made it cut through the walls she had spent so many years building. Her thoughts tumbled, and for a fleeting moment, she wondered if he was right. But no. She couldn't. She wouldn't. "You're a soldier," she said, trying to steady herself, trying to hold on to her resolve. "You fight for power. For control. For dominance. My people." She faltered. "We've lived with balance. With peace. For generations. We don't fight for control. We fight to preserve what we are." "Maybe," Cross said quietly. "But sometimes, preserving what we are means adapting. Changing. Sometimes it means accepting help. Even when it's hard to ask for it." Sarana stood abruptly, her chair scraping back against the floor. She turned her back to him, her hands gripping the edge of the desk as she tried to calm the sudden, unwelcome surge of emotion. The anger, the frustration, the helplessness, it all felt too close. She could feel the heat of his gaze, but she couldn't face him. "Not yet. I can't do this," she whispered, her voice cracking with the weight of the words. She couldn't let herself soften. Couldn't let herself believe that there might be another way. She had to protect her people. She had to protect Zurith. "Then let me help you," Cross said, his voice still low but firm. "Let me help you protect it. Us. We can do this, Sarana. Together." She took a slow breath, still with her back to him. It was a moment of silence, but in that silence, everything seemed to shift. The tension between them hung thick, and for the first time, Sarana felt the weight of the choice pressing on her. Could she allow him in? Could she allow anyone in? When she finally spoke again, her voice was steadier, quieter. "I need time." Cross didn't press her further. He simply nodded, standing up slowly and turning toward the door. "Take all the time you need. But know this, Sarana. I'm not going anywhere." As the door slid shut behind him, Sarana stood motionless, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't ready to admit it, not yet. But something inside her had cracked. A small, fragile sliver of trust had begun to take root, despite everything. And that, more than anything else, frightened her more than she cared to admit.